Welcome to Retrospect, a podcast from Sky Sports News, where each week we will bring you a detailed analysis and a retrospective look at the weekend's biggest talking points, plus all the leading stories from the Premier League. I'm Ben Ransom. Joining me today, senior reporter Tim Thornton. Welcome back, Tim. I assume it was a busy Christmas?
Very busy.
We wouldn't want it any other way, would we? Alongside Tim, a huge guest, someone who has won the Premier League, FA Cup and League Cup, as well as 2 European trophies. He's worn the shirt of Manchester United, Chelsea, Barcelona and Bayern Munich, among others. It can only be Mark Hughes. Mark, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Mark, the last time we saw you, you were in charge of Bradford City. You clearly still have the bug for management, so I'm dying to know, has it been an enjoyable Christmas period, or are you itching to get back in?
Yeah, I've enjoyed it. Been plenty of football to get my fix, so no problems in that regard. So yeah, I'm obviously available. I think we'll probably wait till the festive period is over and then look to see what opportunities there are out there.
Well, it is a bumper edition. On today's show, we'll be discussing what next for Manchester United as the new ownership kicks in. We'll look at Chelsea's continuing crisis. And with the transfer window upon us, we'll chat about the biggest potential deals involving Premier League clubs. But we have to start with the ever-changing title race. Yet more twists and turns after West Ham stunned Arsenal at the Emirates. We're recording this the morning after the night before. The Hammers denying Arsenal the chance to return to the top of the league. So we'll talk more about Arsenal in a moment. But just 6 points separates Liverpool, who currently sit on top, from Tottenham in 5th. Mark, does this title race really feel like it could be a classic?
Yeah, I mean, in recent years, it's been more often a 2-horse race, but this year it looks like there's any number of maybe 4, possibly 5. Let's hope so. That could have a say in it, and let's hope that's the case, because it's obviously from our point of view, looking from the outside in, it's going to be really exciting. The second half of the season is going to be obviously when things kick in. At the moment, you sense teams are positioning themselves just to make sure that they're ready to go. I know from my time as a United player, Sir Alex always used to say, well, let's just make sure that we're ready to go for the second half of the season. Once Christmas is out the way and all the games and all the to's and fro's that the Christmas period brings, once you get that away, then you know exactly you're in position to have a real go for the second half of the season.
Key part of the season, this as well. Lots of games. We've already seen big win for Manchester City against Everton off the back of being out in Saudi. So the result last night for Arsenal, Liverpool keep churning out results, but there are lots of different factors in this title race, not least a lot of players are going to be missing at the African Cup of Nations, the Asian Cup, etc. So, yeah, all to play for and a really exciting second half of the season.
Well, as we record this, Jurgen Klopp has just been speaking ahead of Liverpool's trip to Newcastle on New Year's Day. He says, so far it's okay, better to be 1st than 6th, but both give you a lot of work to do. So, Mark, how much work do Liverpool have to do to stay ahead of the chasing pack?
Well, I think it's, like we've talked about the second half of the period of the season. You get to a point in the season that you're ticking games off. You know exactly what's ahead of you. You're thinking, right, we just got to focus on the one that's next in line. And if you do that, you deal with that, then you're on to the next one. We're not quite at that point at the moment, but there will become a point maybe 10, 12 games to go where clearly that focus on just the game in front of you is what clearly matters, and that's the one you have to address. If you look too far ahead, then you can trip yourself up sometimes.
How does that dynamic change when the pressure's on? When the games towards the end of the season are coming around and you know that there's a team breathing down your neck?
Yeah, I think you can't take a step back. You can't prioritise one game ahead of another one, because irrespective of the opposition, they're all vitally important. So each game has to be viewed in the same light, and the top teams are used to win and expect to win, so they're in a position which they're comfortable with. You might look at Aston Villa this year, where maybe it's a little bit uncharted for them. Same with Newcastle to a certain extent. So yeah, you expect the likes of Man City, obviously Liverpool, Arsenal, dare I say Man United to make a run at some point. So yeah, I think it comes with the territory. If you're a top club, you're expected to win these games and keep on winning.
Let's talk a little bit about Liverpool, because one of the huge factors for me has to be Mo Salah. Africa Cup of Nations coming up as well. Now, he didn't score against Burnley, but over Christmas, Salah's been enjoying another stellar season. He currently has 15 goals, 8 assists, so that's 23 goal contributions in 24 matches. He averages one every 77 minutes. Now, he's got the New Year's Day game, the next one up against Newcastle, then he's off. Can they maintain this form without him? Because if Egypt go far in the tournament, he could miss 1, 2, 3, maybe 4 Premier League games.
Yeah, it could be significant for them. Clearly, he's a huge influential player for Liverpool, and any team in world football is going to miss a player of Mo Salah's character and abilities. So, yeah, they're going to have to address that. They're going to have to work with what they have in the building. Do they feel that they've got the right amount of quality? I would suggest yes. I think they've got good players that can come in and take the gauntlet, so to speak, and take the questions that Mo Salah seems to ask for them, or answer for them. So they've got good players, good squads. Top clubs recruit well more often than not, and you know the reality is you've got Mo Salah in the building, but you know you're going to lose him for African Cup of Nations, and you have to plan accordingly. So they have an awareness of that. They will have things in place that they feel they can negate the loss of Mo just for that short period.
The return of Diogo Jota seems pretty timely. Liverpool play New Year's Day at home against Newcastle. What price of 4-3? Well, it's live on Sky in our first Monday Night Football of 2024. We'll be live with our Newcastle reporter Keith Downey a little bit later in the pod. But we've got to stick with the title race for now. Tim, Manchester City, champions of the world. They came back to win. Sheffield United on Saturday. It feels like Christmas has really kind of fallen in their favour.
We were just chatting actually before we came on. It was a big win, I think. To go to Everton is probably the one fixture, or one of the fixtures, that you really wouldn't want as Pep Guardiola. But they got the win. They've been away. They've had a bit of winter sun as well, which I think for any player at this stage of the season is quite a nice thing to have when you've had a grueling season.
Well, yeah, managers, we all like a bit of winter sun.
But I think that's important. They've come back, hopefully, from their point of view, a little bit refreshed. And this is when they start the grind and they start to go on a run of games where they just chalk them off, as Mark was saying, and they rack up a series of wins. So I think this is probably the most interesting title race we've had for quite a number of years.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, City feel, Mark, don't they? I was at the game at Goodison, I'll say this, and they celebrated with the fans. Guardiola took the whole squad over there for a good 5 or 10 minutes after that game. It felt like he realised this was a key moment in their season. Yeah,
I think it was noticeable to everybody that watched the game, or like you said, you were there and you saw it firsthand. There's certain fixtures in the calendar that you think, oh, that's one that could cause us a difficult moment. Everton very much is one of those fixtures in the calendar where you think, well, if you get them at the wrong time, meaning when the crowd's up and very much with the team, which they are at the moment, and rightly so, Sean Dyche has got them into a place in terms of their belief, and obviously all the Premier League deduction of points obviously is a factor in that, and they're working with that, and that seems, funnily enough, that it's a positive for them, which seems to be a bit bizarre to say, but I think Pep understood that it was a fixture that could be difficult, certainly after having come back from the World Club game. So they were able to manage the game to a successful conclusion, and I think that's why you saw the reaction you did after the game, because he understood that it was a key game for them.
Just a quick one on Phil Foden, because he was a massive influence in that game. How good is he, in your opinion? Should England be building a team around him?
He's an outstanding talent, and I always remember when he first broke in, and you could see clearly he's an outstanding player with the ability to play at that level, even at a young age. And I think people questioned Pep at the time. You wanted to give him more game time because everybody could see how good he was. But obviously they had certain individuals like David Silva who was still in the building, so it wasn't always possible. But you sense that now's the time for Phil Foden. Now's the time for him to become the player that everybody knows he will be. And this is his moment, I think. I think he's having an influence on every game he's playing. He's playing regular football, which he, like I said, he hasn't always done that for Pep, but he's producing moments in games that it's like a little bit of stardust. He's the one that's able to, maybe we're going to talk about Arsenal, I'm sure, later on, but last night they didn't have anybody who could just have that moments of quality that would unpick the lock. But Phil Foden is one of those players that can unpick locks for Man City.
This is why you're an expert guest, Mark, because that is the perfect segue into Arsenal.
There
because
we
can join now a man who saw one of the challengers stumble last night. It's all very fresh in our minds. Sky Sports News reporter Gary Cottrell joins us. Gary, Arsenal second in the league then, 2 points behind Liverpool. A missed opportunity last night?
77, guys. No, that's it's not my age. That's the number of touches that Arsenal had in the opposition box against West Ham without scoring.
You sure it's not your age, Gary?
That's a record in all the Premier League for 15 years. And Mark will know as a striker, as a coach, as a manager, that if you're going to have 77 touches in the opposition box without scoring, then you're not going to do very well in a football match.
Mikel Arteta frustrated by VAR again. How was he after the game?
Well, he was very careful for obvious reasons. There were no disgrace moments because, of course, it's the second time he's suffered with the ball either going out before a cross in for a goal or not going out before a cross in for a goal. Newcastle, of course, we remember well. So he was very measured. When I put to him that, the cameras available to be absolutely clear whether it was in or whether it was out, I have to say it looked out to me at the time. And when they showed what angles they did have, he said, look, if we haven't got the technology, we as a team just have to make sure that we don't need the technology to win games. We have to win it without this kind of decision being made.
Mm-hmm. The game last night, they had a lot of possession. Do they need someone to finish off the chances they created? This is, I guess, the throw ahead to the January transfer window. The big talking point around Arsenal is, do they sign a centre forward? What do you think, Gary?
Well, one win in five now for Arsenal in all competitions, scoring 4 goals. In a way, I know managers don't like to lose games, but perhaps it's a good time to hit this bad streak of results with the January transfer window coming up, because they're clearly missing an out-and-out striker, a natural number 9. They've got talent, of course, right across the pitch, choices in every position, including goalkeeper, midfield, defence, and up front. But Jesus, great player, is not a natural number 9. It's not where he actually prefers to be. Nketiah might be one day. He's not quite there yet. So maybe this is the message that the board at Arsenal, that Edu needs to go out and try and find that goal scorer. But it's so difficult in the January market.
Yeah, listen, I think Jesus is an outstanding player, and I think more often than not he's a real asset in terms of how Arsenal want to play and the way he links play and allows them to play the type of football that they want to play. But the reality is he doesn't score enough goals for me. So he's never going to be a player that's going to score 20, 25, 30 goals, which I think if you're going to have that element and that factor that's going to get you over the line and win the Premier League, I think you probably need a striker that's going to do that job for you. You look at Liverpool with Mo Salah, Haaland is the obvious one in terms of Man City. They have that player that can get them over the line, and I'm not sure that Jesus, for all his qualities, is going to get them over the line.
Well, on that point, Saka, Martinelli and Jesus have a combined 10 Premier League goals so far this season. So is that the key factor? Is it essentially, without that striker who's going to score, as you say, 20, 25 goals, they can't win the title?
It's a possibility that's the one thing that will be a barrier to them able to take that final step and win the title. I mean, last year they came very, very close. It's going to be harder this year, clearly, with the amount of other teams that look primed and ready to have a challenge for the prize. So I don't know whether or not they feel they'll go into the market in January. I'm not sure they will feel that. Be interested to see. January's notorious for not being able to get the player you want, because other teams have the players that you want, and they're very reluctant, clearly, to let them go in January. So they may want to go on the market, but can they get the players that they want? It's difficult.
I'm interested to know, as a manager, the value you place on what a striker brings to the team against purely the goals. Look at you as a player. You brought so much to the team in addition to the goals.
Yeah, I wasn't a prolific goal scorer. I was probably a Gabriel Jesus type player, 15 to 20 goals a year. But I took comfort in myself because of the type of player I was and how I wanted to be involved in the game.
The reason I ask that is because take you out of some of the great sides you played in, you were such a pivotal part of that, and I guess that's kind of the dilemma that Arteta's got.
I think that's the point I was trying to make. He brings so much to the way they want to play, but does he score enough goals? So I played in a team with Eric Cantona. He chipped in with a few as well. So
he wasn't bad.
He wasn't bad. So we'll have to see. It could be that if they don't go into the market in January and they don't win the title this year, people will throw that back at them, that they didn't have a striker to get them.
What was he like to play with Cantona? If you didn't give him the ball when he wanted it, what was he like?
Well, Eric was one of the first. Well, was the first player that, like back in the day when I was playing, he was predominantly everybody played 4-4-2. One striker came short, the other went long, and that's how I'd always played with a partner up front. But Eric now and again would just go wandering off onto the left wing or left midfield, right wing. I'm thinking, where the hell's he gone now? But he was doing it just to create space, and he was the first player that I saw do that to any great extent, and he was so effective because he received balls in pocketed space and arrived into the box really, really late, and that was difficult for teams to defend against. So he was very clever, understood how to always find that little pocket that we talk about all the time now. He was, in my view, he was one of the first I had seen do that, certainly in the Premier League.
Well, while we're on the subject of strikers, Gary, I know you've got to go and get ready for your annual New Year's Eve party, but before you do, I know you cover all the London clubs, and specifically Chelsea. It always feels like it's 2 steps forward, 1 back, but with Christopher Nkunku coming back in this week, are there signs of positivity that Pochettino's onto something?
There's a real vibe at Stamford Bridge, that game against Palace, and most of them have actually seen all season, and a real feeling that the players are now beginning to gel, that they are beginning to understand. Of course, a very, very young side. I think 23 years and 21 days old, the average age of that team that started against Crystal Palace, which is the youngest ever for Chelsea. And like you say, an understanding as well seems to be developing between Nkunku and Nicholas Jackson. They played together really well in pre-season before Nkunku picked up that injury, and they seem to enjoy playing together. Obviously, they're not a natural kind of strike partnership, but they seem to get each other well, and that, I think, is rubbing off on Mudryk, who's scored again and is beginning to look more like a Premier League player. And don't forget, they've got that injury list, haven't they? They're still without 2 of the best wing-backs in the world, in Reece James and Ben Chilwell. And I think that, yes, Mauricio Pochettino was smiling and was happy. I think he could see something now as we're going to the new year, perhaps picking up for Chelsea.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Gary. We'll let you go. But Mark, looking at Chelsea's Premier League position, as much as Pochettino might have a smile back on his face, they're 10th in the table, 25 points from 19 games. Is he in any danger of going the same way as Graham Potter?
I don't think so. I think there's an understanding at Chelsea that, there's been huge investments, and it's a time of transition. They're going from the Abramovich model to a different model now, in terms of they're trying to buy young players that will develop and progress as a group, whereas maybe in the past the ready-made players were targeted and brought in to get the job done quicker than possibly the vision that they have now. And I think this year is one that everybody at Chelsea understands maybe one that will be a little bit difficult for them, but I think the hope and the idea is that next year that's when you'll see where they're likely to go, because that group will grow together and progress together.
It's quite unusual, isn't it, to have a situation where there seems to be a little bit of patience for a manager and a project.
From Chelsea, yeah, absolutely.
But from your point of view, when you've been in jobs, were you constantly looking over your shoulder and thinking, we need to win the next one, or was there a period in your career where you thought, I'm really enjoying this, everybody's invested in what I'm trying to achieve, and I know that I'll be given the time?
I don't think I ever had that luxury, if I'm honest. I think the top line managers, the ones on that elite group of managers, I think they probably get indulged a little bit more than I've ever been. But and rightly so, I would suggest people would say. But yeah, I think there's huge investment in people, in players, and in managers and management groups. So you're not just going to take that away, because that investment needs to be given time to do what they feel they're able to do in terms of their abilities. So yeah, we'll have to wait and see. I don't think Pochettino is under any pressure whatsoever. As we've said, he's there because he's good at bringing good young players through and making them better, and that seems to be the model that Chelsea are following at the moment. You
don't feel there's any similarities between your time at City, when you were effectively given a load of shiny new toys and told to make a team?
Yeah, well, I was never at any point Man City's new ownership group's man, which is different. Obviously, Pochettino's been brought in by the current ownership group, so that's a huge difference in terms of my situation at Man City.
Right, because this is the time of year that involves a lot of travel, we're now going to drive straight from London up the M40 to the Midlands. I made my first ever trip to Aston Villa's training ground last week ahead of the Sheffield United game, and since then it's been 2 disappointing results, so I don't think they'll be welcoming me back, but one man who is welcome there is our Sky Sports News Midlands reporter Dan Khan. Dan, I hope you've been enjoying the festive period a little more than Villa. How has this period been for you? But more importantly, I suppose, how's it been and what's the mood around Villa after those disappointing results?
Yeah, hi everyone. I mean, I think with Villa, I think there's an acceptance that obviously their start to the season has been brilliant, hasn't it? And these maybe disappointing festive results come off the back of 2 incredible wins at Villa Park against Manchester City, which I was there, and I've not seen a team play against Manchester City like that for 90 minutes, basically pinning them back in their own half. And then they beat Arsenal a few days later. So I do think a lot of their energy went into those 2 games, and we've probably seen that in the next few festive fixtures, should say, where they just maybe haven't reached those levels. I mean, Mark, I'd love to ask you kind of, when you're managing in the Prem, just how much physically and mentally does the festive period take out of the players, and really how do you manage the load?
Yeah, it's basically about playing the games and recovering. There's very little in terms of preparation tactically that you can put into the players. Really, it's just about making sure everybody's sound. If you can look after players, because the period's really intense, and if you lose players for any significant time after the festive period, and that can impact you even more than maybe taking somebody out for one game so that they're okay for the next 4 or 5. So it's about balancing and understanding your group and just getting through the period. It's not easy, and it does test teams and players and managers alike, but it's why the Premier League and British football is so unique. Everybody else is on their holidays and we're still playing, so we should enjoy. We should never get rid of it.
I've got to say congratulations to Dan as well. It took him about 20 seconds to get a question to Mark, who I can exclusively reveal is one of Dan's favourite players.
All right.
Oh, this is nice. This is a Christmas coming together.
Wow.
Did your dad
you
tell
just stopped me in there too.
Your dad must have told you about me, I think.
Send you a virtual hug, Mark. But actually, just going back on Mark's point about if you miss a few players, I do think that is something Emery would point at, because during this festive period he's missed Pau Torres, who a centre back is so important, being left-footed, the way they build up and kind of pass through the lines. They've missed him. Yuri Tillmans has been out most of the last few weeks in fixtures. He's really gone to some great form, and just with a few suspensions as well, they've missed Boubacar Kamara, Douglas Luiz, and one or two midfielders, as Mark was mentioning. You miss a few key players there. They don't really have a replacement for Ollie Watkins either. As a striker when he comes out. John Duran has been all right, but they probably need someone in between the both of them to bridge that gap in quality to come off the bench.
Another player, Dan, that you might not remember I'm going to talk about next, because we're going to move on to Nottingham Forest. They've got their new manager bounce at the second attempt under Nuno Espirito Santo. What a result for them at Newcastle. Hat-trick for Chris Wood, the first second player to ever score a Premier League hat-trick, the first since Kevin Campbell in 1996, another friend of Sky Sports News. A lot of people were impressed with that. A lot of people impressed with the performance, Dan. But what's changed in the short time for Nuno?
Yeah, well, I actually sat down with Chris Wood and Nuno Espirito Santo ahead of the Manchester United game. And I asked them that very question, Ben, and they both kind of mentioned, well, there's not been a lot of time between these festive fixtures to work exactly on the tactics maybe Nuno wants to implement long term. But the key word they both mentioned was confidence. And I think they probably lost a bit of confidence on that 8-game run in the Premier League without a win. But I think that game against St James's Park, you watched how they played. I mean, they played with that confidence, that flair. And that was the thing that stood out to me the most, was going forward, they looked a force once again. And I do have to pick out one player, Morgan Gibbs-White. I mean, it tends to be when he's on form, the rest of Nottingham Forest, the whole squad and the way they play, they're back on form. And he didn't get a goal or assist that day, but he kind of was instrumental in most of the goals and their threat, really. And Nuno knows him really well, having coached him at 16 years old at Wolves. But something Nuno mentioned, and again, Mark, I want to get your kind of take on this, because Nuno and Steve Cooper mentioned before him, he has quite a big squad. And obviously he's come in now during this festive period. And he told me he's trying to still suss out a lot of the players to see what they're going to bring to the squad, and he's giving everyone a chance. But when you go into a squad, Mark, into a new team, what's the first thing you're looking at in terms of the players? Is it their personality traits, or is it literally just their work rate on the training ground?
I think initially you have to lean a little bit on the staff that you've inherited, just to give you a little bit of an insight and a guide to what you're working with, because obviously you've seen these players from the outside, but now you're in the club, you're working with them, and you've got to accelerate that process, because along the way, along with trying to implement the way you want to play and hopefully improve the results, you can only do that by understanding the group you've got to work with. So you lean a little bit initially on that knowledge that the medical staff, sports staff, some of the coaches that at times you inherit, and you get an idea of what you're working with. But then very quickly you've got to make your own judgments on the players that you're working with, and then you pick your teams according to that understanding that you have eventually.
Would you ever speak to the man you've replaced and get his take
I've never
on?
done that. I know some managers do it. It's probably a good idea. I've never done it. Maybe that would have helped me and accelerated the process. But I know some managers do that. I've never done it, but it can help, I'm sure.
And quick one, Dan, on Wolves, because Gary O'Neill has done a fantastic job for them so far this season. No VAR controversy for them over the Christmas period yet, but I think they've got to be happy, haven't they, the Wolves fans?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like you said, I think Gary O'Neill's been really happy. I've not been asking about VAR for the last few press conferences. But no, they've been really good, really, really good. The festive period has been a great period for them as well. I mean, the win against Chelsea, I think, has kind of highlighted how good they've been at Molineux this season. I think they're unbeaten in 7 in a row. And then the result against Brentford, again, I think that away performance was coming as well, because previously you mentioned VAR. I mean, the Sheffield United game, we also look at the Fulham game as well. They're probably unlucky to not at least get a point in those games. So they're doing really well. And the fact they're already 11th, Tim, I mean, if they win this week and results go their way, they could be in the top 10. And when you think Gary O'Neill took this side 3 days before the season began, they lost a lot of players in terms of experience. João Moutinho, Ruben Neves, even Adama Traore as well. He wasn't playing, but just that experience in the squad. They've missed all of that, but Gary O'Neill's done a sublime job. I mean, Mark, just very quickly, I mean, what do you think about the job he's done? But also the work he did at Bournemouth last year as well.
Yeah, I've been very impressed. It's very clear that Gary has a real understanding of how he wants his team set up, and he's able to impart that message very, very quickly to his group. And as a consequence, they're reaping the benefits of that. So credit to him. I think it's really important when you go from obviously being at Bournemouth, where he wasn't brought in, so to speak. He was uplifted into the position, did really well. But at Wolves, he obviously was brought in to do a specific job, and credit to him. I think Wolves must be very happy with the appointment.
Dan, before I let you go, you've got a choice of Christmas presents. You can either have a signed photo of Mark Hughes from his playing time at Manchester United, or a signed photo of him in his management guise. What would you prefer?
Oh, I'll take anything, honestly. I mean, my dad will probably get more mad, because my dad loves you as well, Mark. So for either of us, I'll take anything.
Tell him you got 3 questions to Mark Hughes. He'll be very impressed with that.
Brilliant. Thank you very much,
that's
Dan.
Bucket list tick. Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Take care.
It's a Christmas miracle. That's what we aim to do on Retrospect. Well, coming up, we have got plenty more, including we'll get Mark's thoughts on the roller coaster that is Manchester United, including the huge off-field changes that we've seen. Plus, we're live to the northeast to find out whether Newcastle have had to change their targets for this season after a pretty torrid Christmas. Welcome back to Retrospect from Sky Sports News. Still to come, we will be joined by our Newcastle reporter Keith Downey ahead of their New Year's Day trip to Liverpool. But first, it's been a real roller coaster for Manchester United fans so far over the festive period. 3 of the 4 halves of football they've played have been widely criticised. Then there was that final 45 minutes against Aston Villa that has United fans thinking they've turned a corner. Mark, you've got a long affinity with the club. You obviously still live very locally as well. Where do you think this United side are at? And is it crisis or are they on the up?
Well, it always seems at the moment that United only one game from a crisis, if that's the right word. I remember back in the day when we had a little bit of a dodgy spell. There used to be cracked badges in the press, and that was about as strong as they got. And then we get back to winning ways, and everything went quiet, and the noise went away. And I think United just got to keep the noise away from themselves at the moment. Obviously, there was a big issue about the ownership group. It's not been resolved exactly how every United supporter hoped, but clearly there's been a shift to a different thinking in terms of the football side of it, at least it seems. So I'm hopeful that will settle things down and then get things right on the pitch, because clearly it hasn't quite been where it needs to be. United should be right at the top, always challenging, and that hasn't been the case of late.
Can I ask you about the strikers? Højlund got his goal at last in the Premier League. Marcus Rashford, great last season, not so good this season. And as a striker, the wide players, do they create enough for the strikers? If you were playing down the middle for United in this current side, would you be able to keep your cool?
Well, it's difficult at times. I mean, for me as a striker, and I look at the young lad Højlund, and it's a big weight for him at the moment. He's just a young player. What is he, 20 years of age? And at the moment, he looks like he's just struggling with the level. There's a huge demand. You play for United. The shirt is heavy. And if you're not quite strong enough to carry it initially, then it can affect your form and your ability to affect games. And at the moment, I look at his play, and I don't think the rest of the team are looking to him as the focal point of the attacks. And it's not like a Watkins or a Haaland. When they play, it's predominantly you see balls and lads in midfield looking up, can I get into the striker? United aren't doing that at the moment. So for me, if I was in his position, I'd be going nuts. Because how can I show what I want to do if I'm not that focal point? You've got to deserve that mantle, so to speak, because if you're not getting on the ball, you've got to find a way to get on the ball. And at the moment, he seems to struggle with that part of it. But the goal itself, I think everybody saw his reaction after he scored. It was an outpouring of relief and emotion, and I was pleased for him because he deserved the goal. And certainly in that second half performance, he was part of a good response to a difficult situation, and I think that can help him and help the team as well.
And Rashford, why was he so good last season and he's been comparatively poor this year?
Yeah, it looked like he'd slipped back into that period before his good spell last year, and it just seems at times when Marcus plays that he's not enjoying what he's doing. I mean, he's playing for Man United and he's a striker, and if you score a goal for Man United, there's nothing better in football. But he still seems a little bit down in himself for whatever reason. But I just feel that if he played with more of a smile and more enjoyment into his play, and there's a lot of elements that factor into how you can enjoy your game more. But I was always taught, and an old coach of mine, Eric Harrison, obviously, who brought through the class of 92 and 82, which was a good class as well.
Class
that
of
was
82.
mine as well.
I was born in 82, so I'm part of that team.
Yeah. So he always said, if your team's not playing well or they're having a bad time, look at your wide guys, because basically they're the issue in his view, because wide guys instigate attacks, they have to produce crosses, they have to create themselves, and actually when out of possession, they've got to get their backsides back and help out defensively as well, because you don't want your fullback exposed 2v1. So if your wide men aren't doing both of the roles, then sometimes the team can be affected adversely. And sometimes I look at the work of United's wide guys defensively, and I think that's an issue that needs to be resolved.
United are still 7th. It is worth pointing that out. Sir Dave Brailsford was in the crowd for that victory. Obviously, the Sir Jim Radcliffe statement came out. It was very interesting. I thought they were promising effectively to deliver sporting success to equal the commercial success that the club has had. But what's the priority for them coming in, assuming they do get the opportunity to make those changes? Is it personnel? Is it the manager? Is it something different?
That process is something that they're going through now. They're looking at every aspect of the whole club. I'm sure the whole football side, at least. David Brailsford is well known for his marginal gains and looking at those really small elements that make, if you address the small things, then the bigger picture becomes better. And so he'll go through it like an investigative performance director, and he will try and target areas where he knows he can make an immediate effect on the team. Is he going to make a huge impact on their fitness? I'm not so sure about that, because they're professional footballers, they're at a certain level. I think it's more a mentality and a psychology in terms of making sure that they have the United mindset and they have that strength of character. When things go against them, they have to come through the other side.
Well, I was in Nice last year, spent a few days out there and had a good chat with Dave Brailsford, actually. And it's interesting because obviously he's come from a different background to football, but he was targeting different people, speaking to lots of people within the game and getting as much information. He was doing a lot of the recruitment, for example, at Nice, so he's speaking about different players, but just lots of figures within the game and getting as much information as he could. And as you say, the marginal gains, I think that's his thing, that he looks to get as much info in as he can and then use that in the correct way. At Nice, he used it to bring players in, but I'm sure he'll have a big impact. That's his DNA, really, isn't it, in the fact that he makes a difference in that way.
Yeah.
Well, next up for United, it is Forest away. On Saturday, it's live on Sky Sports. It's a 5:30 kickoff. Well, it's not just a busy time for footballers, of course. Busy time for us reporters as well. And fresh from Eddie Howe's press conference, we can now speak to our North East reporter, Keith Downey. Keith, we're live to the training ground. On our screens, we can see you, the indoor pitch behind you there. You've just spoken to Eddie. How's he feeling? Is he feeling any pressure whatsoever?
Firstly, Ben, I'll let you into a little secret. We should have been out of here probably about half an hour ago. So I can actually hear the players training on the pitches outdoor just behind me. Hopefully they don't realise we've kept in an extra half an hour today to speak to you guys. So yeah, apologies if I'm talking quietly, but just in case they don't hear me. How was Eddie Howe this morning? Do you know what? He was calm, he was measured. I got the impression that he wanted to put on a show of unity to try and almost show that although results aren't good, they've of course lost 6 of their last 7 matches and have slipped down the Premier League table, exited the Champions League, exited the Carabao Cup, and it has been a month to forget for them. That despite that, the bigger picture is Newcastle United are still in a strong position in terms of the Premier League. And one of the things that he said today, he said, one of my strengths is in moments of trouble and moments of need, I managed to stay calm in a situation, in that sort of situation. And he said most managers at the top level are like that. And he knows that if he was to get too negative off the back of the defeats to Nottingham Forest and then Luton over the Christmas period, it would affect the players as well. So look, he didn't jump into the room buoyant, but I think what he wanted to do was just to appeal to any of the supporters who were getting a little bit jittery after the Boxing Day defeat to Nottingham Forest, just to stay calm and to sort of perhaps realise where the club was 2 years ago. And, it's in a strong position now. Yes, they've got some very, very difficult fixtures coming up over the next month. They face Liverpool, of course, on Monday. Well, I'm sure we'll get on to talking about that. Manchester City and then Aston Villa. And of course, the small matter of Sunderland in the FA Cup in the middle of that as well. But what they've got, Ben, in January is they've got 4 matches. 4 matches. Of course, there's the winter break in there. They had in December 10 matches in 30 days. It was a really, really difficult schedule. They weren't training. They were essentially just playing, resting, playing, resting. And you remember they played the same players again and again. I think 5 matches in a row they started with the same 11 players, so they've not trained at all. And as I've just said, I can actually hear them out training on the pitch behind me, and that is something he's not been able to do with the players for a while. I think he's looking forward to January, getting some time on the training pitch with the players. He's got players coming back from injury now as well, and just righting the wrongs of the last month. And look, there's plenty of games coming, there's plenty of big games coming. They need to look at it as a test and a way for them to sort of grow and hit back. And look, it's been difficult, I think, for everyone at the club. A lot of people outside did not see it coming, but I think the feeling from within the club was that they were going to have a difficult patch at some stage of the season, given the Champions League schedule, and it's hit home in December.
Keith, when you were on one of your many sunshine holidays, I think about 18 months ago, I was with Newcastle on pre-season in Austria. And having spent some time around the camp, you could see the culture that Eddie Howe has set up there. And surely, as a club, Newcastle are not going to throw that away if they get a string of disappointing results over the next 5 or 6 weeks, because fans will start asking questions if results aren't what they want. But there is a big picture here, isn't there, where Newcastle are on the right track. I think it was the cup game against Manchester United a few weeks ago when everybody was saying, look at Newcastle, this is what Manchester United should be doing. And suddenly, after a few defeats, there are some question marks. I guess it's the nature of the Premier League, but Newcastle are going to stick with him, aren't they, long term?
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that Manchester United game, Tim, because he was asked about that in the press conference, and it was literally 3 weeks ago. And he said, look, that was our best performance of the season. He goes, although since then we've exited the Carabao Cup, we've exited the Champions League. They could have played in the Europa League had they got a draw against AC Milan, but they threw the kitchen sink at it and ended up out of all European competition. Although it hasn't been good, just 3 weeks ago they were beating Manchester United in what Eddie Howe has just described as their best performance of the season. And look, they do have a good group here. I think that's the first thing Eddie Howe does when he looks at a player. He looks at their character and how they'll fit into what they're trying to do, how they'll fit into the setup here. And you can tell that it's a team, it's a squad full of good characters. In terms of Eddie Howe's future, what I can tell you is, from my understanding from conversations with people from within the club, is that his position is safe, and it's as safe as it has been for the last 2 years. Now, I don't think anyone at the club is considering what the future could be like without Eddie Howe. I don't feel the supporters want to consider that or want to think about that. But what I will say is, when I left the match on Boxing Day, popped into the pub for a couple of pints.
Of course you did.
Just a couple. And every single fan came up to me wanting to know what the situation was with Eddie. And it wasn't, do you think we need a change? It was concern. It was worry. It was, will the owners decide to pull the plug because we've lost 6 of the last 7 games? And what I can tell them is that my information is that the club, and by that I mean the UK-based owners and Amanda Staveley, Mehrdad Guddusi and Jamie Rubin, but beyond that, the Saudi side of things, and of course remember the PIF own 80% of the club. The word from all sides is that he is safe, they're in this together, and they knew, as I touched on earlier, they knew that there would be a difficult point in the season, and they've reached it right now. And this is not a time for any kind of division in the ranks. So, look, that will be good for Eddie Howe to hear, but I don't even think he felt he needed to hear that anyway. I think there's an understanding from within that this could happen. And, look, it's a united football club. Of course, there is the concern that if they lose to Liverpool on Monday, they then lose to Sunderland in the FA Cup, which will be difficult going to their great rivals. I've not played them for 7 years, and remember, they haven't beaten them in the last 7 times they've played. They then plays Man City at home and plays Aston Villa away. We might be in a different position come the end of January. So this is the message I'm hearing now. Obviously, things, of course, can change. And we've not actually seen the Saudis make a big decision yet. Remember, Eddie Howe has been in charge for the 2 years since the takeover happened. Apart from, opening the checkbook to sign players, they haven't made any big decisions. So, look, things obviously could change. But in the here and now, Eddie's in a very strong position. And this is something that the power brokers within the club expected would happen. And this is a time, as far as they're concerned, to stay together. And I think most Newcastle United fans, or all Newcastle United fans, will be pleased to hear that, because they, I think, feel that the future of the football club, the way they see it, would be with Eddie Howe at the helm.
Mark, Newcastle currently 9th in the Premier League table. They're 8 points outside the Champions League places. January is in front of them. A bit like the question we had about Arsenal spending maybe to bring in that centre forward to try and win the title. How important is it for Newcastle they get bodies in January to try and move themselves at the very least closer, or maybe qualify for one of the European competitions?
Yeah, you would imagine that they have the means to do that and the resources, but just going back to what I said earlier, it's not easy to get players or the right quality players that you covet because they're at other clubs, and those clubs actually going to allow you to take their better players from them in January, when those self-same clubs have probably the same ambitions as Newcastle have. So it's not easy to navigate that January window to get the key players that will make a difference.
But do they have to, I suppose, is the question.
Well, we touched earlier on, they are getting players back. There's a feeling that maybe they're missing someone in the middle of the park. I think Phillips from City has been mentioned in terms of coming in, possibly on loan or whatever.
Would he be a good fit?
I think so. Yeah, I think so. That's the type of player that I'm sure Eddie Howe would like to work with. So it's whether or not they feel they need to address their failings or their weaknesses in the squad right now, or they're just going to keep their powder dry, understand that the season was always going to be like this. There was always going to be periods where they struggled a bit, and they'll wait till the summer and then address what they've learned about the group at that time. But next few weeks will be interesting, certainly in terms of Newcastle and how they approach it.
there is so much right with Newcastle at the moment, so I hope they do stick with Eddie Howe through this difficult period. Can I just ask you quickly about the transfer window? One player that a lot of clubs have been linked with is Ivan Toney, who comes back for Brentford in January. Where do you think he might end up? Will he stay with Brentford, or could he go to Tottenham, Arsenal?
We probably already discussed where there's a need. Certainly Arsenal, I think, would benefit from Ivan Toney going there. He's a big physical presence. He's clearly adapted to the Premier League. He can score goals at Premier League level. That would be a natural fit for me. But there's other clubs that may well covet it. But you look at maybe Tottenham. Could be an option for him. I would imagine he'd look at the London-based clubs because he's from the south and that's where he plays his trade. So it wouldn't surprise him if he went to either of those clubs.
Well, that'll be music to the ears of Aaron Lennon. He sat in this very studio in that chair, Mark, last week on the most recent edition of Retrospect, begging Daniel Levy to sign Ivan Toney.
I can understand why.
And you can listen back to that, of course, wherever you do get your podcasts. Keith, before we let you go, I saw you were nodding along there as we were talking about transfers, specifically Calvin Phillips. Is he going to be at St James's Park in January?
Oof, that's a loaded question, Ben.
Well, I'm the City reporter, so I'm allowed to do that.
But before, you probably know more than me. Before I attempt to answer that, I just want to touch on something that Mark was saying there, because obviously, when Mark was in charge of Manchester City and the takeover went through, financial fair play obviously wasn't a thing then. And, it was a very different landscape for Manchester City and Chelsea back in the day as well. But I think the problem Newcastle have got is that they're really having to cut the cloth the right phrase? I'm not sure, because this is a club who have spent £400 million in 2 transfer windows. But what Newcastle haven't been able to do over the last couple of years since the takeover went through is have not been able to trade, other than Chris Wood, who they sold for £50 million to Nottingham Forest, having bought him for 25 just a year earlier. They haven't sold anyone. Alan St-Maximin went for £23 million to the Saudi Pro League. They haven't sold anyone. So Newcastle didn't have any assets within their squad that they were able to sell, and that's what's causing them problems with financial fair play. And in his press comments this morning, Eddie Howe mentioned financial fair play time and time again, because he knows that is their biggest challenge in January. So I feel from what he said and from the noises I'm hearing from within the club, that Newcastle will add in January, because I feel that they have to. I think the loan market will be what they look at primarily. And I think Calvin Phillips would be an ideal signing for them. Mark there mentioned that Newcastle need a holding midfielder. It was plain to see on Boxing Day against Nottingham Forest. They ran over the top of him in midfield. And I think if they were able to bring in someone of Calvin Phillips's ilk in midfield, that would allow Bruno Guimaraes to push on and help the forwards. And look, the club didn't expect Sandro Tonali to suffer or face a 10-month ban for the betting allegations. Did not expect that at all. They've had to deal with it. I think if they could get someone in now like Phillips between now and the end of the season to basically just come in and replace him until the end of the season, that would be a perfect scenario for them. I think the big question is, and you would know the answer to this more than me, Ben, is would Manchester City be happy with a straight loan? It feels as though he's not part of Pep Guardiola's plans. You would imagine they'll want to cash in, but then you've got to throw into the equation that, of course, he's been a top pro in his time at Manchester City, and that he will want to make sure he's part of that England squad at the Euros next summer. So, look, I think Newcastle are going to go for him. I think they will try. I don't think it's going to be quite as easy, because it's a loan that they're looking for, and you would suggest that Manchester City would prefer a sale and to bring the money in. So look, it's going to be a fascinating month, but I think he would be someone that would really supplement what Newcastle have got and really just give them that help in midfield that they've been crying out for in the last few weeks.
One thing that might help them, Keith, actually make the deal happen is the fact that Newcastle are slightly off the pace in terms of that battle for the Champions League. Look, Pep's, I think, made his decision, his thoughts on Phillips very clear. I've seen him in press conferences apologising to Phillips via the media, saying, look, I've not been able to put him in. I love him as a person, but he's not picked him.
He looks the perfect fit for Newcastle in terms of the way that he plays. He thrived in an environment with Bielsa where they played high intensity. He's a great character, great lad. So he'll fit into the dressing room, and I think location-wise as well, it suits him perfectly. So ticks a lot of boxes, and I think everybody will be happy if that deal gets done.
And there'll be some money between the clubs as well, you'd imagine too. Well, before we wrap up on this week's retrospect, we've got a couple of other quick points and two managers who are having different form at the moment. We're going to have a word on Roy Hodgson, Mark, because Crystal Palace they've been struggling a little bit, and you know how this feels as a manager because the back pages have started to link other managers with his job. I think Steve Cooper is the latest name to be linked there. They're just 3 points now above the relegation zone with the teams below them starting to win. I know Gary Cottrell was at the game against Chelsea. I know that he said that Steve Parish did go into the Palace dressing room after the game. What's your feeling around Roy's position? I mean, he'll know the game as well as anyone.
Yeah, Roy's aware of the noise, so to speak. I've mentioned it before, but it does start to build, and you sense that's where Palace are at the moment. And you would like to think that the club isn't briefing media. It's saying that we are possibly thinking of a change. You hope that's not the case, because that's how it starts to build and gain energy and momentum. Roy, as we said, knows exactly the lie of the land. He understands the only way you get rid of that noise is by winning football matches, and that's what he's there to do. That's predominantly what he has done in his time there. He's done a fantastic job, but it's whether or not everybody is on board at the moment. If there's some faction, be it the supporters or the board or clearly the players, if any one of those groups are not quite with the other two parts of the club, then that's when things start to pull apart. So you hope, given the job that Roy's done there, that everything settles down and they're able to get back on track, because they've got some great players. I love watching like Eze playing his football when they're on the form. They're great side. But you'll have these periods through the season where things don't quite go to plan, and that's when you've just got to navigate through those.
I want to give a mention to Luton, because I was at their game with Sheffield United on Boxing Day. Hugely impressive. Rob Edwards doing a great job there, and I think a big few weeks coming up for Chris Wilder at Sheffield United as well. He's looking for players to go into their starting 11 to improve them in this January transfer window. But also Bournemouth, they're flying at the moment, aren't they? Yeah. And Dominic Solanke, what have you made of him? Because he's been around a while, but he's really stepped up a gear this season. Could he step up into international football?
Yeah, the way he's playing at the moment, there's no reason why he can't. I think he's a player, you're right in saying he's been around a long time, and his name's been mentioned for a number of seasons, but he's never really nailed down a position at any of the clubs he's been at. He's had spells and periods within seasons where it looks like he's going to break through. But this time it looks at Bournemouth that he's very settled. He's clearly the main man there, and it's back to that point of being the focus of everybody's attacking intent. It's when people playing for Bournemouth, midfielders, fullbacks, wingers, who are they looking for? They're looking for Dominic Solanke, and he's benefiting from that. But that comes from being the main guy there.
It is a system. Credit for Andoni Iraola for the way he's got them playing. And to be fair, Solanke, 13 goals in all competitions. Yeah. You'd say he's in that conversation with Ollie Watkins, Ivan Toney, to try and get that spot in the Euros this summer for England. Just finally, Mark, before we let you go, Burnley, one place off the bottom. They play Aston Villa on Saturday. Now, you signed Vincent Kompany, so you know him very well as a man. He's always comes across fantastically well when you get to sit down and speak to him. What does he need to do? Because he's talking a good game. He's talking about performances. The players clearly still love him. We heard that from James Trafford last week in that interview that he did with us on Sky Sports News. But results are just not coming, are they? They're not getting over the line in matches. Yeah,
Vinny's done a great job. Obviously, last season in the Championship, they were outstanding. They've gone from the expectation of winning every game to playing in the Premier League and finding it very difficult to win any games, and that's difficult for the group itself. And Vinny, I know, will work a lot away from the pitch in terms of videos and getting detail into the players. I think probably there's a balance that needs to be made. If you give players too much information, there's only so much they can process, and they can get bogged down a little bit, and maybe that detail has to be made a little bit more simple, just so that they can go out and play.
When did they change that? Because you, and in that City team that I remember you managed, you tried to create this incredibly open, attacking, exciting team. Was there a moment when results weren't quite going that you thought, I might have to temper this slightly?
Yeah, you have to
Vinny's
compromise.
Trying to do the same.
Yeah, I think Vinny will know that there comes a point where you have to compromise your principles. Yes, you want to play a certain way. You want to be a possession base. You want to be a front foot team, whatever it is. But if it's not quite working, not getting the results, then that's what you will be judged on, not on your philosophy or how you set up your team. It's basically the results that you get on the board. So they're in a position now where they're at the bottom, and of the teams in and around them, they're not getting the positive results that other teams around them are getting at the moment. So he may well have to compromise how he wants the game to be played and how he wants his team to show. It'll be difficult, but it's probably a necessity for him at the moment.
We started with the title race. Can I ask you who you think's going to win the title? Because we've talked about it being a wide open race, but who's going to win it?
It's a difficult one. I'm really excited by what's ahead of everybody. Just looking from a supporter's point of view, in terms of football itself, I think it's going to be really exciting right to the end. And the closer you get to those last 10 games or so, 10, 8, 7, 6, 5 games to go, that's when it'll really heat up. So I'm waffling here because I don't really want to answer the question. Who knows? You sense City lining themselves, getting themselves into position, and we know they can go from this point right to the end of the season. They could win every game. I'm not sure other teams around them have that capability or capacity. So anybody who finishes above Man City will win, I think.
We almost got there, didn't we? There must be a fence under that chair, because everyone who sits in this studio always manages to sit on it. Well, look, that is it. I'm afraid that's all we've got time for, but it is a fantastic time of year for live sport. This weekend on Sky Sports, you can watch Nottingham Forest against Manchester United, Fulham, Arsenal, and then Liverpool, Newcastle is the Monday Night Football. Plus, of course, it's the climax to the World Darts Championship at Ali Pali. We're out of time. We did get through a heck of a lot on this podcast. If we didn't get to your club today, then check out Sky Sports News or the Sky Sports website, where we will have all the talking points from the weekend action, as well as exclusive video highlights from all of the Premier League matches. We're here every week, so if you're new around here, if you like what you've heard, if you want more from pundits like Mark Hughes and others, then we'd love you to give us a like or click on the link to follow or subscribe so you don't miss any of the talking points around your favourite club. Thanks very much to Mark, to Tim, and reporters all around the country. It's the final day where it is acceptable for me to still wish you a Merry Christmas. We'll be back on Retrospect next week. It'll be the first pod of 2024. So until next time.